Welcome to China Paradigm, a show powered by Dashi Consulting, where we interview seasoned entrepreneurs and experienced managers in China about their business and experience in the country. Hello everyone, I'm Matthieu David, the founder of Dashi Consulting and its podcast China Paradigm. Joining me today is Josh Gardner. You are the CEO and co-founder, I think you have two additional founders in your company, of Kung Fu Data. So what are you doing with Kung Fu Data? You are an activation partner for China's big e-commerce platforms. So you help foreign brands enter and succeed in China, whether it is e-commerce advisory, activation, optimization, or brand control. And brand control is such a concept you are emphasizing on. You are the first one, actually, I see emphasizing so much on brand control. We will see that later on in the talk. And to finalize the introduction is that you say you want the foreign brands to enter and succeed in China by leveraging data and, which looks a bit old-fashioned, relationships. And we will go back on this. Relationships are key in China, even in e-commerce, even in something which is as modern at tech as e-commerce. You moved to China 24 years ago. So just say it again.
25 1995. Yeah, long time ago.
Pre-Taobao, pre-iPhone. Taobao was started in 2003, iPhone in 2008. So you came to China when it was not that connected to the internet. So you saw all the development in China. And at the beginning, what you were doing, you were working on minorities in Yunnan. So you have a very deep understanding of China. You studied it. You actually started to be interested in China very early in life by studying anthropology and Chinese studies at Boston University. You started Kung Fu Data in 2014. You have served more than 100 brands. You have generated more than 700 million RMB, and you have offices now in Beijing, Shanghai, and Hong Kong, where you are now, where you're coming from, San Francisco, New York City, and Rome. Very unique to have Rome too. That's a question I will have too. Why Rome? You have clients such as LVMH, Nike, Lane Crawford, Gap, but also Beats, Roche, President. So it's luxury food and beverages, beers as well, very wide range of clients. I like to read what you wrote on your LinkedIn, and sorry if it's a bit long intro, but I think it's very interesting. And to show how mission-driven you are. So you write on your LinkedIn, I'm on a mission to help brands thrive in China's online marketplaces. 24 years ago, I moved to China to study Mandarin and to do fieldwork on minorities in Yunnan. I lived among people who had never seen a foreign face. And as an outsider, and you like this word, I feel, I had a lot to learn. The first thing I learned was that China is really big and that New England, where I grew up, is very small. The second thing I learned is that while doing anything in China seems daunting, it is much easier when you have the right connections. Here we are again, connections. Key relationships define success in almost every aspect of Chinese life, but such relationships cannot be superficial. That's also a very interesting thing. We see so many foreigners having a gambay with Chinese people, and that's, I feel, superficial. You tell me if you think this is the same. You have to bring genuine value. The third thing I learned, and I'm quoting you, I'm reading your LinkedIn, was that China is an inside game. You either know how to play it or you don't. And if you don't understand the playing field, you may be frustrated, disappointed, and often humiliated. So take the time and get the facts. Maybe it's the reason why you insist on data. No one wants to admit that they are an outsider, so they pretend. They lump Chinese consumers into one basket. They pass judgment after reading a few reports on going to a conference. They hire folks who are either unqualified or don't have their best interest at heart, and they hand over control to local partners who can stand up to simple questions like, are their clients happy with results? soon finishing, but it's very interesting. It's easy to blame China, but harder to accept the truth. Most Western brands can't ignore China e-commerce, but have no idea how to run it properly. China, to remind the fact, is 20-25% of world population, and actually now it's a market of let's two-thirds of China is able to buy online, and middle class is like 400 million. So it's one of the biggest markets in the world. You cannot escape it. Even with all the more sensible things my wife of 19 years wishes I would do for a living, what excites me most is driving successful e-commerce launches in China. I'm here to help Western brands take control of their destiny, to bring transparency and accountability. Looks like a lot like EO, accountability and transparency, by the way. We will mention EO at the end of the interview, certainly, into the decision tree. I offer a sounding board built on real data and relationships and real experience operating brands on Tmall and JD. It's time to put the voice of reason into the China plan. Anyone ready to listen? Question mark. Here is intro. Thanks for being with us. So what situation now of the company? We are in a very, very special time now. It's still coronavirus all over the world, except because now you're two assembly Lianghui in China, right? Except China.
Yeah, so what do you want me to address in that question? That was a huge intro. So specifically, what would you like me to respond to? There's like a lot of topics.
I'd like to start with the situation of the company. So I didn't mention actually the size of the company, but from my understanding, you're about 50 people now, more than 50 people. So if you could share a bit of where you are now.
Okay. So we are obviously dealing with the crisis, right? So, but right now we have about a dozen stores, so brand stores between two platforms. We usually do around, so I have two divisions, right? One side does what we call take-backs and turnarounds for brands, as well as sort of just data to understand, what the size of the prize might be, and sort of help them on the way in to just make sure they get set up right when they're looking. So we're not a market research company. It's a very targeted, very targeted business model where we look strictly at the business case for commercial launch in the online marketplaces. It's very specific data, and it's a very specific casework. So the benefit of going through that process is, of course, much lower failure rates, much higher success rates, and realistic expectations, which no one likes to hear. On the other side of the business, we do a lot of activation and operations. So that's why we have a dozen stores, and it varies from year to year. But in general, the business has grown a lot, and we have I think it's total of 12 brands right now. So actually it's 15 stores, excuse me, because I'm not counting a lot of the JD stores. So yeah, it's about 15 stores, 12 brands. And, our GMV is pretty decent now. It used to be small, but we've scaled up quite a bit. Last year we doubled. This year I was expecting to either double or triple. Unfortunately, that's not going to happen. However, and that's what I think you wanted me to address a bit about COVID, how it's impacted us. I think initially we were like everyone else in China, just scared to death. I knew that we had positioned our business in a way that it's sort of recession-proof from that standpoint, because I do see a long-term and very powerful trend. And it's not even a trend, it's just the new behavior of humans, like consumers, moving towards a digital format to buy and sell the things they want, right? And need to get rid of. So I saw in China that wave happen in such a huge way. And I don't think it's going away. I think it's just going to increase and accelerate. So going into COVID, we knew we were going to suffer, but we just figured we would have to just get through it. So I'll do pre and post. Right. So my team is spread out in many offices, which you mentioned. The overseas offices, one is my sort of data and advisory group that's based in the States with the analytics people. The other locations are more like business development. So we have a few reps there. right? And I have a lot of it. As you can see, I have Italian clients and some channel partners there. So we actually have a rep in Italy that works for us. So that was the Rome office. And then New York, we have one, and then in the States, we have 11 people, something like that, or is it seven people? And the rest of what we call the international team is split between Shanghai, I'm in Hong Kong, and then the States and Europe. So we have our international team, and then we have our local team. Yeah. So the operations team. The operations team is seated in Beijing, where my two partners are, and my client services and brand management team is based in Shanghai. So that's in downtown Shanghai. And then I commute. So I used to be in that office, and then I moved to Hong Kong a few years ago, and I'm basically on planes 35, 40 times a year. So I fly a lot normally. So COVID, let's get to it. Everyone asked me this question, and so I'll be very straight. The first 6 weeks it started, so from the end of January through sort of the end of February, it was terrible. So it was really, really bad. All the stores had a huge impact. So we had a lot of clients in categories that were deeply affected, sort of attached to sort of F&B or retail or travel retail or something like this. So those kinds of products took a big hit in that month, big hit. But since March, totally different story. So March was huge. We were up over last year 80% in gross merchandise volume. Seriously. Last month was maybe slightly less, but it was still like 60, 70% growth. And May is actually huge. I think it's going to be over 100. So we're seeing, so on a quarterly basis, I'm over last year, even taking the hit in January and February. Even with that hit, we are up. If you look at 5 months, we're up very significantly. And while it's not perfect, meaning across the board, you don't see consistency in the sense that my clients are still suffering if they're in those categories. But if, like, let's say you took out the 3 or 4 stores that are, let's say 30% of my portfolio is deeply affected by COVID, they're still growing again. So like they're back, they're heading back up, right? And they've recovered. And the rest of the stores are up huge, right? So, or at least even with last year. And to me, that's exceptional. So that alone should tell anyone who's listening that Chinese consumption, at least in online marketplaces, is actually strong. And I think it's going to be, I hate to say it, I think it's going to grow this year. I don't think it's going to be down over last year. I'm just not seeing it yet. There was an assumption that, and I read it in the media every day, the Western media, that there would be a huge blowback on China, which would crush consumption. I have to say, I think because the online marketplaces are filled with, I think there's 850 million or 750 million people just registered in Taobao, right? Something like this. A huge percentage of them are tier 1 clients, meaning like tier 1 and tier 2 sort of consumers. The issue with tier 3 and 4, which are deeply affected by COVID because they're the manufacturing base, but tier 1 and tier 2, consumers, even just millennials, right? There's 400 million of them. That's bigger than the population of the US. And they have more money than the average American. Like, they have tons of cash than the average, they're fine. And their parents fund them, right? You see it every day in Shanghai, right? They've got, they get, a lot of them are spoiled, but most of them are just supported, right? And they have a safety net. Most of them did not lose their jobs because, as an employer in China, you can't just let people go. You're going to get severely punished. And so we were actually forced to keep them. But I think what's interesting is we weren't allowed to lay anyone off. We weren't really allowed to do anything as an employer in a tier 1 city. And I think because most people like me were in that situation across the the eastern seaboard, I think everyone's got their money, right? All of them have their jobs and they all have their money. And as soon as confidence was restored in March that they weren't going to lose their jobs, right? Everyone's shopping again, and they're frustrated. And they want to shop more, and they want to go out. So if you go out on the streets of Shanghai now, I know because I'm in touch with everyone like every day, and my team and my friends. I mean, because there's few restaurants, there's bookings for 5-hour waits. There's lines everywhere to just go out to eat. And you know that. And I think that is the story that's happening, is that online consumption is growing very strong, as well as even the places that are opening offline are starting to see traction because people are ready to get back to life. And we see it with consumers in weird categories like motorcycle accessories. We built the #1 brand in that category on Tmall and JD actually. And they're doing super well, and they sell full price retail, super expensive, like safety uniforms and stuff. Their category is up 100% over the last 3 months. The Chinese government just put out legislation. You have to wear a helmet, even if you're on a scooter. I mean, like you can't even imagine. And people are not leaving their homes yet, right? Like some of them are back to work, but this is proof that Chinese people really are ready to go back to work and back to their normal lives. And we're seeing it in the online numbers. Like I'm seeing it. I do have stores that are not performing well because they're in deeply affected categories. But if you look at it as a portfolio of 15, right? Only 4 are suffering. The other ones are doing exceptionally well. I think the main thing that people need to know is that the impact outside of China, how it hurts China, is that the brands, like my customers, are suffering, so they don't have budgets. They can't support like a more aggressive growth. There's supply chain disruptions, but it's really not coming from the China side, which I find very weird. Make sense?
Yeah. You mentioned a lot about the numbers which are growing. What about in a qualitative approach? Are there approaches, practices, a way of shopping you see changing, or it's too early to say?
Oh, that's a really big question. I dare not answer it with so much confidence, but one trend I have seen, and it's because I've experienced it, the power of live streaming to me is exceptional. So
I'd like to stop on this 1 minute in your presentation, and that's something actually I was thinking of talking later on. But you did a live streaming with Li Jiaqi, right?
2. We just did one on May 17th. We doubled the sales of the last one in half the time.
That's amazing.
We sold out 3 million in 2 minutes. I mean, and what's interesting about it is not the volume or the speed. What's most interesting is that even though we just did this like 6 weeks ago with him, we ran it again. His audience is even more willing to buy the same brand. So I thought that, these guys could only do it one time and they have to move to the next brand. The conversion rate more than doubled on this second one. And even the viewers, conversion rate, everything was up. So the sales, we sold out in 2 minutes at double the size. And I was really unbelievably impressed with that. And we're also doing a lot of other kinds of live streaming with tier 2s, tier 3 KOLs. We're doing it internally. And what we're seeing is that, and this is just the anthropologist in me, I think live streaming is becoming sort of a substitute for physical contact and socializing the way we used to. And it's becoming something people are now relying on because they're not able to see. So it's like, in a way, it's not replacing human touch in that sense, but it is definitely making it feel less distant to shop. So you've socially distanced yourself from friends and family and colleagues. But when you shop now, you actually want more human contact than a stale product page. And, to give you an idea on conversion rates, it's 14%, like nearly. Like 14, right?
Well, how do you calculate?
Very high.
It's interesting, but how do you calculate the conversion rate? Is it the number of viewers? Is it the number of engagement with the KOL? How do you calculate 14%? It seems very high to me too.
Yeah, we just look at the amount of people. There's a lot of people views. I don't count views because that's impressions,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
So there's impressions, right? And then there's people that engage the product link. So from the time someone's engaging the product link, that's when we start to calculate. So if you've clicked on the link and you go to the product page,
I see.
that's what we're talking about.
From the KOL.
Which, by the way, is but even so, that would be yeah, that's the equivalent of, for example, you go into Taobao and type in, whatever, bottles, and you click. The minute you click, that's when we start to calculate conversion rate. So it's the same as we would on any paid media or performance marketing tool. What's interesting is that the conversion rate in live stream is going up, not down. And that's not just with Li Jiaqi. I see it with my office staff who are doing this, with the tier 2s and tier 3s. Over time, the trust builds and consumers seem to have more and more confidence in that method of purchasing. They seem to show preference, at least for the entertainment value alone and sort of the human contact and the interactive, and it seems to be working very well. I have to tell you, the conversion rates are much higher doing that now than some other things we're doing. Not that they have bad conversion rates. Like the highest conversion rate is a brand's traffic, right? A brand's equity. So Mingxin Dianpu or Pinxiaobao, you're going to get like 20 to 1, 30 to 1 kind of returns. I wouldn't say you're seeing that here because of the cost of the KOL. It's more like 5 to 1, but it's still very reasonable. And from my standpoint, it's one of the best tools to both activate the brand and make sales to cover the cost of the activation at the same time. And so that's one big... Oh, go ahead.
You're saying where you have the highest conversion rate, and that's still the case now, even post-COVID, is when people look for the brand, you say 5 to 1 or 20 to 1?
So in your brands, like, so when you launch a store on Tmall, right? Tmall is a brand control platform. Its purpose was to separate the Taobao resellers from claiming to be Nike and Adidas and other brands from the actual authorized either licensee for China, reseller for China, or the brand itself. So its purpose was to, honestly, to eliminate fraud, right? Because there was like a massive... So in 2006, Taobao was so successful, within 2 years, everyone was claiming to be every brand. And so Tmall was under pressure because of the counterfeit, misrepresentation, things like this, brand squatting, to create authorized commerce. So it's actually a brand control terminal. So when you register a Tmall store, you must have very clear rights to the trademark that you own. That's your brand's property. Now, when I register a trademark on like a famous brand, for example, my store then gets the rights to the traffic on anything related to that trademark. So anytime someone types in, for example, whatever, Apple or whatever, iPhone, the brand's flagship should appear above everything else. If you're looking at a mobile screen, the first third of every mobile screen is either Pinxiaobao, which is your brand's banner in the general search in Taobao, or Mingxin Dianpu, your diamond display. It's your brand's banner, and it controls a third of the screen real estate. So it has massive convertibility, like on that traffic. It's the highest quality traffic. And you pay the least amount because you're the only one with the rights to it. So you're not in a bidding war for your own traffic. So yes, what I told you is true. On the low end, the rate of return is about 15 to 1. On the high end, I have clients between 35 and 40 to 1. So obviously the first thing you want to buy is as much brand traffic as you can get. So if you can, that's what it's all about, right? If you have enough traction and you can control the routing of that demand inside the commercial marketplace, then you actually have a lot of pulling power, much higher ROI, and you have enough think your SKUs will be supercharged. They'll be like hero products that allow you to get all the generic traffic and sort of compete head on with competitors in everything from events to performance media to all the different aspects. Live stream's a totally different issue, right? It's completely different. It doesn't matter if you rank or don't rank. What's different there is that you get audited by the live streamer themselves or their agency. So you have to go through a vetting process, which isn't much different than the kind of vetting you would if you're thinking about taking on a new, product to buy, right? A new brand. So they put people through a screening process that's pretty intense. And your brand's performance has to be at least for tier 1 KOLs, has to be at a certain level to justify them taking you in. Make sense?
Yeah. So we mentioned live streaming. Do you see other elements changing with COVID? Do you foresee some elements changing?
I think there's been some temporary patterns, like people buying more things like hand sanitizer and home supplies and things like that.
Okay.
But I'm not seeing that as, I don't think that's long-term. What I think is more long-term is the need for engagement in general. So the most engaging shopping channels I'm seeing become more powerful than the old ones. So they're sort of defining what we do. So for example, Taobao used to be a destination, right? So you used to go there to search, to do things. Chinese don't even search for things. They search for brands now, right? There is no search for things. So the actual consumer journey, is happening outside of the platform. So the traction builds, or that original point of interest, is happening outside these commercial marketplaces for the most part. And so they've realized this. Like for example, Taobao itself is starved for traffic. It's kind of tapped out. So what's happened now is you have to have integrated marketing to pull and amplify during any sort of sale period or event. And they will require you now to integrate your marketing outside their ecosystem, inside their ecosystem, to get qualified to be in those events. And there's a reason for it. It's because the path to purchase isn't starting there. It's not a self-contained ecosystem anymore. So they did a deal with Douyin and integrated with them, immediately seeing that as a flanking strategy and also the future of sort of entertainment vis-a-vis Tencent, because Tencent was getting some traction and they just blocked it completely straight out, right? So Alibaba and the other ecosystems are trying to absorb or integrate the demand generation platforms, the places where community is being built, the places where decisions are being made and word of mouth is happening, into their ecosystem. So it's become a giant web of influence, and consumers need to hear signals from all over the place. Like if they come into Taobao, there has to be a certain amount of reviews, a certain amount of volume, a certain amount of, people saying things, a certain amount of content, to even think about buying something, right? And it's pretty elaborate. So the path can happen over a long period of time, and it doesn't happen inside. By the time they go to a Taobao or JD, they're searching for a brand or a specific product that has a brand name. So you're looking at, when I say brand control, you're looking at optimizing that path so that it all lands in your store or your authorized stores, and it doesn't end up in the hands of the gray market, unless that's what you want.
What you are saying is that currently the way you attract traffic by different means such as Douyin, WeChat, social media, and other new sources of traffic is amplified, and that Alibaba, we used to work in an ecosystem which is pretty closed, has to open up to those other sources. It's now assessed, it's accepted, and brands have to do it.
They're either integrating it, they own it themselves, or they invest in it. So Xiaohongshu, Red, they invested in and integrated all the activation into every Taobao listing, right? So all that influence and activity of consumers, the user-generated content, is directly embedded into every SKU, right? You see your Red listings in Taobao. They did a deal with Douyin and integrated it with their Taobao affiliate program so that they're going to pull all the traffic from Douyin straight into Taobao and Tmall. They created live stream and pioneered it. So they own an 80% share of the market. So all the truly high engagement sort of shopping channels, they either own, invested in, or integrated, other than Tencent itself, right? A few of theirs. But I think Alibaba's got a pretty commanding share. So if you just look at consumer behavior, they've either tried to change it, influence it, or make sure that the fish can only swim back into their pond, right? So if you think of like Taobao as a giant ocean, they're making all the rivers go straight to their ocean, right? They want it all spilling into them. And that's why Taobao is a big mess, right? It's got everything. It's like Disneyland of e-commerce, right? It's ridiculous. So it's pretty much every single possible kind of social interaction is happening in there, with one exception, WeChat, right? That's it. They even own a Weibo, right? There's Sina Weibo, which Alibaba owns, and then there's Tencent's Weibo, which they own, right? And they're like at war. There's a wall, but everyone's trying to cross it, and now, you know, Tencent's blocking people really well from moving from WeChat into Taobao, because a lot of the Taobao traffic is coming from private pools and private communities inside WeChat, you know, getting promotional links and stuff, and then people are going into Taobao and making the purchase. And Tencent's trying to block that from happening because they control social interaction, right? It's our, you know, that it's our main communication tool. So I think it's the human, I think consumer behavior after COVID is very different now. So it's, it was happening before, but now it's like almost deeply entrenched.
Amplified, yeah.
Amplified,
I like to go back to the beginning actually of Kung Fu Data. How did you learn about e-commerce? How did you start, and how did you build a team with your partners? I think we don't realize how much. I mean, we realize with just what you said, how much there is of learning to set up a shop, to understand how to drive traffic, and not to waste all your money in the traffic. It's very easy to lose a lot of money in traffic.
Yeah, that's a very good question. So you know what's weird? I'm a very consistent person. So I walk my talk. So I say, for example, you mentioned my LinkedIn profile. All the things that I mentioned there is exactly how I started this business. So I'll go back in time. After I was a student, I couldn't get a job. So I was an anthropology student. Then I became a researcher in China, and, you know, did a big paper on, you know, a published paper on the and you know what? In 1997, when I graduated school, no one wanted to hire anthropologists. The funny thing is, fast forward to now, 2020, industrial anthropologists get jobs instantly, right? Like every corporation wants them, but they didn't want me back then. So I had to get a job. So I ended up in Beijing, and I worked as the manager of a logistics company. So we were doing import export. At the time, we were bringing in infrastructure. So my clients were Siemens, Nokia, you know, big companies in Europe, bringing in 3G infrastructure, the internet cables, like the stuff you mentioned, the stuff that wasn't there, right? During that time, two gentlemen worked for me. One was there when I came. He was my assistant manager. And the other one we hired was his friend. And these are my two partners in KFD as a group.
Interesting.
So I keep my relationships in China over extremely long periods of time. And actually, I think relationships in China can be either one of two things: purely transactional and superficial, where you're going to do business right now and then go, or it can be something that builds up over time and gives you an extended network of influence and really access to stuff. And so I went long on my relationships in China. So I accumulate. I never dump friends. And so in around 2012, they actually came to the States to visit me. And I was running, I had started a brand, which we sold via e-commerce, right? It was an online distribution brand. It was in the B2B space. And we started,
I started that. You were in which way? You were selling on which way? From China to the West?
No, I owned an e-commerce distribution business in the US.
I see.
And I bought about half of my inventory in China. So I left logistics, went into sourcing, did a B2B exchange. I had a bunch of startups that didn't do well. And then I ended up launching in a stupid category. But anyway, I launched in a category where we could win. And we did. During the dot-com meltdown, you know, you may have been too young then, but there was what we called the big drop in 2001 after the crash in 9/11. Everyone let go of their .com domain names all at once. and I bought an entire category. I owned over 400 .coms in a stupid category. It's stupid. But what happened was, this was pre-AdWords. So you couldn't do performance marketing like buy clicks. You could only own either direct routed traffic or SEO. Well, I happen to have the best property portfolio in the space. So we got all the traffic and all the leads. And then I failed as a trading company doing that out of China. But then I moved into distribution because most of the leads were sort of small, mid-sized businesses or smaller brands, and they needed product and they just wanted to buy in small quantities. And that's how I got into e-commerce distribution in 2004. And by 2006, the company was a success, and it kept growing and growing. You know, back then there was endless credit lines and things like this. So anyway, the company did okay. We got killed during the crash in 08, 09 because the housing market had a deep impact on the kind of product I sold. So we were on the back end, the packaging, but the people that filled and sold to homeowners, they were crushed. So it was a tough few years. We didn't really go down in sales, but the banks called all the notes on my business, which wasn't fun. And then in 2011, 12, I was kind of had it, and I wanted to exit that business, but I didn't tell anyone. My two friends, those guys, were in Beijing, obviously, and then they flew to the States for a holiday. And I took them all over New England, and we had a really good time. And they were like, hey, you know, you need to come back to China. And I'm like, maybe, you know, I mean, he was like, no, you got to come now. You got to do e-commerce with us. And I'm like, what do you mean e-commerce, right? So one of my partners, his best friend from childhood, like a faxiao, you know what that is, right? Like a very, very special childhood friend, started and they're still one of the largest TPs in China. So they're huge. They run VF brands. They're massive. They started in 06, right when Taobao started. There wasn't even Tmall at that time. And they're beasts. And he agreed to teach my partners the business. You know, it's very strange, right? You're actually creating a new competitor. But, you know, he didn't see it that way. Cool guy. So I flew over to China in 2012 just to have a look-see. And I went to his office. I sat down, saw what was happening, and I said, oh, this is unbelievable. Because at the time, I was in the States going, e-commerce in China? What are you talking about? I have an e-commerce business here. And these guys were like, no, you got to come now, right? Now is the time. And of course, I arrived late, so end of 2013. And I went up to Beijing, saw what they were doing, and said, all right, I'm in. And we started the company in 2014. So we were late to the game. But that's one of the stories. So it's really, from the standpoint of learning, I think, and adaptability is a better word. I think in China, you need relationships with enough people to give you that information, that inside information, and have enough sort of credentials or clout with a certain group of people to make something successful in China. And that's true even if you're a brand coming in now. Nothing's changed. To me, nothing's changed. One of my really good friends, I can't tell you who it is, in the last 3 months has made more money than they ever have, right? They just shifted during COVID and took advantage of it. I have another friend similar. So you build up sort of it builds up over time, right? You ratchet up all these network effects with relationships in China. And I think it's having a good personal network and those relationships, and then being open-minded and humble that you don't know anything and things are going to change radically, enables you to be successful in the market in long term. That was a long answer to your question, but
thank you very much. It's a very, very, very interesting answer and story, and it reminds me the story of Fritz. I never remember his family name, from Tuna, who actually started from with one team to another, but with the same core team. And actually, that supporting what you are saying, when you build a relationship, keep your relationship with your team, with people you worked with, because you may start a new business with them. And I think it started 3 or 4 businesses. And that's the same from a bank, a French bank, which established an office in Beijing. And they said when they started, they had connections with lower level officials. And then those lower level officials went up. And then they were able to have a higher discussion with them. So I feel a pattern here.
Absolutely. I think that is the pattern. I think you have to go long. If you're going to approach, and this is probably true anywhere in the world, but my biggest and only specialization is in China, where relationships, no matter if it's technology platform, it really doesn't matter what you're doing. They make the biggest difference of all things. Like key relationships with clients, with platforms. It's in China, you have to almost rig the game in your favor and create sort of an unfair advantage and a defendable position. And you can try to do that like you would in the West with legal things and IP and stuff, but it's super hard to defend without the relationships in China. And that's where they come in. It's having access to resources, having access to privileges, and being able to sort of accelerate and grow and get support from a community around you gives you a huge advantage over everyone else. So yeah, you need all the other things. Great product, great idea, blah, 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 blah. But in the end, I think the single biggest driver of success in China is execution around relationships and inside knowledge and timing. So having the right timing combined with the right relationships, it yields so much more in China than anywhere else I've ever seen, because you don't need anything.
What I understand as well is that building a relationship is actually possible and open. It's possible to build relationships. It's not to be seen as actually something very closed. When we use the word guanxi, it's very seen as something which is closed. You cannot enter, and it's difficult to build. But actually, from my understanding, what you are saying is that actually it's about building relationship, not only owning it. You can build it and create it.
Absolutely. I mean, I just in the last 7 years in Shanghai and in here, I've built unbelievable amounts of new relationships, whole new networks. I wasn't in China e-commerce. I just understood what e-commerce was because I ran a business in the States. We had a lot of clients. We did a lot of volume. So I understood what it took to do it. But here it's completely different, right? And it's much harder, to be honest, like super hard to do anything here, let alone, I think we are one of maybe 5 foreign-led operators in the market left. And, navigating the relationships between the platforms and the clients and the agencies and even the booking agents for like KOLs like Austin has more of an impact on sales and results than anything else, right? You can have the most beautiful art, design, products. Actually, it doesn't even matter. It's irrelevant. The outcome of a big event or the outcome of a campaign or any given year's revenues has so much more to do with the sort of combination of the skill of operation with the navigation of key relationships. If you can do both of those things really well, I think in China you can do well. And I know people that actually don't have a lot of relationships in China. The difference is they got in early and they built a big team around them that does have those relationships. So let's say you're not a relationships person, you need to have someone on your key team that does that for you. And you need to get in at a time where you can get the traction, take a leadership position, and have sort of an army around you. It can be a sales team, the biggest in the space, which to me is a relationships team in China. And the bigger it is, the more likely you're going to win, because no one's ever going to go that deep into hiring, right? That big of a sales team. But it's actually a huge competitive advantage. And one of my clients, that's how they activated their brand in China. They're now a 350 million RMB brand, and it's an American product. And they started from grassroots. We're going to go through dealer networks. We're going to build distributors. We're going to have a sales team that finds resellers, give them all the marketing materials they need and support and inventory and credit terms, and let them grow the business. And just in the last 6 years, I've watched them grow 5x. Like this year, it'll be $1 billion RMB. And online is going to be more than double last year. So instead of 160, 360, 370, something like that. And it's all because of that infrastructure. But it's old stack tech, right? It's people. It's the right people, the right butts in the right seats, the right people doing the right things right. right? And I think in China, that matters more to me than in other markets. I haven't seen a software solution, automation game that works in China. Consumers are too smart. People are too educated. They're very slick, and the ecosystem itself doesn't allow that to work long term. You can be copied, replicated, outmatched, outsized, crowded out of a business almost instantly. So when I think of success in China, I always think right away, do we have an unfair advantage? What is it? And then let's say we do. Let's say we think we have one. Can I defend it? A bigger question, because a lot of brands will have that. They'll get to scale and then they get crushed by the locals very quickly, or another competitor coming in. And that's because they didn't have a defendable position. They had a great idea or a brand or a product, and they came into the market and built something, but they couldn't take it to that next level because they didn't know how to defend the space around them. So you have to have both. Advantages that are not easy to replicate around that big barrier to entry in China, the willingness to go super long on China, which gives you a huge advantage, right? You don't care what happens this quarter, right? That's very powerful, especially with Chinese. They respond very well to it. They know that you're there long and that they can't play games, right? So that's where I say stay away from transactional culture and focus more on a long game. And that is something I see the foreigners do. We're in an organization together. The ones that do really well do that well, the long game. They're not really like a short-term success. It's always a long-term. Now they may have, it looks like it's short-term, but it's really not. Like some of the same people we've talked about on earlier, they'll start a business from scratch 8-9 weeks ago and do tremendous volume, but they're not starting from zero. That's what people don't realize. They have a huge base of relationships behind them that creates the opportunity to be in on those deals, to be in on that moment when it's the right time to launch in that space. I see that more than anything else, dictating success. Does that make sense?
You mentioned how you learned about e-commerce. How did you convince your first clients to trust you to open a Tmall and to manage their online presence, their brands? You said that 2013, 2014, foreign brands were getting into Chinese internet, but it was already, everyone knew it would be a big thing. So giving you the presence and the responsibility of managing their assets, their marketing assets on Tmall and the internet, generally speaking, it's a big thing. How did you convince them?
Oh, that's a great question. So I'm gonna keep repeating myself, but it's funny you say that. So first of all, we didn't start as a TP. So I started Kung Fu Data to just do data and subscriptions. That was the original model. And of course, I didn't know, being ignorant, right? I hadn't been back living in China for a decade. Chinese people don't subscribe to things, right? They're not ready for the subscription model with the, monthly charge on the credit card kind of. It's not there. And so my original model broke. It didn't work. I tried it. It was like 2014. I tried it for like 6 or 7 months. And we were dying. Like we only had like one person subscribe. It was terrible. I couldn't, and it was a foreigner outside of China. So I couldn't get anyone to buy the data because they thought it should be free, or, they just didn't see any value in it. And I was like, what do you mean you don't see any value in this data? It's unbelievable. We spent all this time building the platform and blah, blah, blah. And they're like, yeah, but we can't use it. We don't know what to do with it. And so it started this way. We had a broken model, and we had to either pivot or die. So I made an executive decision to move away from data and instead teach clients how to use it. So then we moved into sort of consulting. It moved to consulting, which ended within like 3 months, because you do the consulting and they're like, yeah, but you guys are really smart and you know what you're doing and this stuff seems like it's going to work. Why don't you do it for us? So the trust was built over a period of time. Again, it's not an overnight thing. It took a while to convince the first person, almost a year. Most people don't have patience, right? Most people don't have patience. It's not an instant success. So it took time to build up that credentials, to the reputation, to get them to trust us. But then once we did our first launch and it was successful, that's when it became much easier, because now someone's saying, hey, these guys do great work. And then you get a lot more. You can build from there. Another thing is just having the right relationships in Shanghai, being with the right people and finding ways to be really valuable to people who already have those clients. So we built our entire business through channel partners, all of it.
I see.
And channel partners in communities that we were very active in. And what I like most about China, one of the things I like most about especially Shanghai, is the openness of the people in that city. Openness to change, openness to ideas, openness to innovation, openness to any kind of learning and improvement. And almost no one will turn away an appointment with you if you sound interesting and have something to share. So what I did was I looked around, found out who had all the relationships with the people that I would want to work with, and I went and tried to make myself as valuable as I possibly can to those people. And then they made those introductions, which built our book of business. And then now it's gone way beyond that. So now we're on the other side of that. We're one of those people that has all the influence and relationships. And, I have a lot of young people coming to me all the time asking for introductions and help to help them with their business. So I'm actually that person. And because it was miserable for me, I help almost every single one of them, right? If I can, I think people are very generous in Shanghai with introductions, but they have to feel that the person they meet is of the utmost quality and integrity, or they just don't help them. I'm not big on people who are commercial or transactional. So I will avoid them or ignore them or block them from getting involved in my ecosystem deliberately. So that's something that I think most people will never tell you outright, but it is definitely something I see, at least in Asia Pacific, among locals and expats. You have to preserve, the integrity of your community, and you lose face if you introduce people that aren't really useful or valuable or honest. Like, they'll take someone honest and genuine over someone selling something unrealistic, right? Or being transactional. So if someone's being transactional with me, they get nowhere. I immediately, right? And that's how I know. Immediately when I play the, I'm not sure, this kind of thing, I see how they respond. The ones who get my help understand what they need to do to build that trust with me, and they take a lot of time to do it. And then I help them. And I think most of the people do that for others in Shanghai. I'm sure you've seen it. You're deeply involved in the community. You lived in Beijing and Shanghai. That is the grease in every engine in China. That is the gas in your car. It is your ability to navigate a web of influence and relationships, and it's everywhere around us. It's on the applications on your phone. It's in your car on the, it's with your friend on the weekend. It's going to clubs and bars. It's everywhere. There's no way around it.
You said it took you 1 year to close your first client to have a full management of e-commerce for them.
Yeah.
How did you survive for 1 year? What did you do for 1 year? You learned more about e-commerce. You practiced. You were scared to death. I don't know. It sounds very scary. 1 year. You were building a team. It's very uncertain, right?
So another thing is, I'm old, right? I'm not starting from zero. This isn't my first rodeo, right? This is not my first shot on stage. I've done this. This is my number six business. So after having 3 fail and 3 succeed, I understand one thing. There's going to be a huge gap between your expectations of what's going to happen and what you need and what actually happens. So you have to have a plan to get through that first few years of business. In China, apparently, I underestimated that. So in the US, you only need like 18 months or 2 years or even 2.5 years. Oh my God. In my space, it took us, I'm embarrassed to admit this. It took over 5 years to make money, right? It's that competitive in my space.
last
Yeah.
year, because you started in 2014. So you're saying that it was tough for 4 or 5 years.
I think that, but I think most categories in China are like that, with few exceptions. I think there is a huge wall of competition, and it's a massive, like, think of it as like a big trough, right? It's huge, and you've got to be willing to go through it long enough so that you can get to the other side, which is where all the winners sit. And it's super hard in China. I mean, it is super hard. And so my partners and I, of course, suffered miserably, but we managed to get by. A couple of things. We didn't not have revenue. So I should tell you that, right? I mean, once we got through we had seed capital, our own money. So we invested our own money into the business. Like I said, my wife would have much rather of me learned on someone else's dime and had a secure job for the last 6 years. But instead I did this, and she's not too happy about it. But the way I paid for it is, through my old lessons in other businesses, you never put all your eggs in one basket, right? I think that's a lot of people say sink all your ships if you really want to succeed in business. I think that's, from my standpoint, hey, that's great when you're 25. But when you got 2 school-age kids, I have a 14-year-old and a 10-year-old. I've got a wife, I got a family. You can't do it that way. So number one, I have a very supportive wife. And she's an anchor, right? She works. In addition, I kept several businesses that I still own, even today. One of them's kind of gone away in the last 7 years because it was something that I didn't actually build. I just let it die out. But the other 2 are enough, right? They've been enough until now to cover all of the expenses of running a startup. But if you don't have that, then the answer is you either fail or you raise money, right? Or you find a way to be supported. So, but lifestyle cost in Hong Kong and Shanghai is insane with a family. So, it takes a village. That's what I tell everyone. So I've got multiple teams in different businesses. My core business is KFD and e-commerce, and I spend a lot of my time there. But I also still maintain other revenue streams, and I have to, because otherwise there's no other way to get through that period of time in the business. I just wish it was more, less time than it took, right? It took 5 years. That's a really long time. I've never had a business take that long to turn the corner and get to scale. But it really, if you read the books on this, maybe I was just kidding myself, right? Like when you have 40 staff, you're losing money. It's really when you get to like 100, right, that you're at scale, or 70, or there's an inflection point in a business. You make money with less than 20 staff and over 80. That middle ground is like, it's like the desert, it's like hell. And so we've been kind of sitting in there for many years, right? Because of the ups and downs of the business. But I think now we're if we can survive COVID, we're fine, and we're doing okay. So that's a good thing.
So we talked about COVID, we talked about the start. I'd like to talk about the services you provide to brands. In your presentation, you specifically mentioned, so you're providing support on opening Tmall and managing the Tmall, but also JD.com, basically selling for brands on the Chinese internet. You mentioned in your presentation, we have used 40 plus proven methods to activate and optimize brands on Tmall and JD. 40 plus proven methods. I'm not asking you to list all the methods because it will take a while. But what do you mean by those methods? It's something I've never seen before among TP brand agencies to talk about 40 plus proven methods.
Well, we started in performance marketing, data-driven performance marketing, direct response. So when you have a team doing A/B testing, by the way, this isn't rocket science. It's just hard work, right? If you look at most TP teams, they're like college graduates that get some basic training. They really don't have a lot of skill in marketing or otherwise. My team, as an example, an average operator is with me almost 5 years, right? So these are very senior store managers. They've done, one of the girls on my team, as an example, she's been with me for 6 years. She's managed everything from Beats by Dre to like selling butter. I mean, she's been in 20 categories. She's so good at what she does. Like, some of the methods she's developed on the fly. She's done, on average, let's say hundreds of A/B tests a month for 5 years, right? So the methods come from experimentation, right? Just like if you're doing a scientific experiment. And I used to have someone on my team. He left us to start his own business, another Kung Fu graduate, super smart guy who developed a lot of our tech, like our, not tech, but our proprietary sort of methods. I'll give you an example of one he discovered. So we figured out, there's a weird thing about the shopping cart in a Tmall store, as an example. That shopping cart doesn't put your products on shelf all the time. Follow me here. If you open an Amazon store or your own e-commerce store, the minute you load inventory and go live with the product listing, it's on shelf all the time. There's never a time of the day that someone would not see the product. That's not true in Tmall. You have to manually decide your listing times. So what happens is most operators, as an example, use the default settings and leave their stuff being shown mostly during certain times of the day. So we do the opposite. They're there with all the fish. We're not there. Another thing we discovered, and by the way, that works unbelievably well in certain categories where people don't do optimization. So let's say you have a permanent SKU like an iPhone. You can't really use that to great effect, that timing listings on shelving, but we call it on shelving, but as a method. But with clients or brands with or categories with a lot of SKUs, most competitors automate their listings in some way through a system. We don't. We do the opposite. And so we get all the top positions in search. We get all the traffic free, right? That's one example. Another great one is rank pumping. And there's many ways to do this. But one of the ones we figured out was the algorithm is not about price, volume, or anything that people expect. It's about speed. So, you heard me. It is a speed, it is a traction algorithm. It's based on the speed at which you convert an impression to $1 for Jack Ma. It's that simple. It's about speed. And it indexes speed of that growth. Okay, the growth indexed against your social score and reputation. Soft metrics.
Interesting.
What that means is low return rates is a simple one, right? Your products aren't returned and there's no complaints. But the algorithm looks at a lot of those formulas. And what it is, it's looking for hotness. How hot are you? Are you the hot one in the category? Are you the hottest? And so that's why there's always room for newcomers in every category on Tmall. All you need is your brand to have faster traction than the other brand, and you can blow the competition out of the top spots. So we discovered that, and then we have special ways of not tricking, but convincing the algorithm that our products sell faster. And without giving details, because it's a competitive advantage, it works every time, and it's something like that. So we have 50, 100 of these methods now. But I have to say that while they are important when you're doing performance marketing and optimization, they've become less important in recent years because the most powerful way to convert is happening earlier in the journey outside of Alibaba, right? What's inside is a reflection of what you've done well outside. So for, people that are super good at, let's say, brand positioning and incubation, which is something we're doing now for brands, that is the holy grail. And when it works, you have new tools now that skip all that hard work with optimization. So you can go straight to live stream, right? You can build up enough traction on a brand or a product to drive live stream as your core optimization method. And by the way, it works super well. And it's less stressful. We don't have to do a ton of A/B testing, and all the performance marketing methods actually support that and amplify the result of it. You can skip things, is what I'm saying. It's really about your ability to resonate with a tribe and get them to be super active in sending the right signals around, and then capturing all the signals and throwing it all through your store. So that's the whole game, right? Get everyone interested, convince them to buy, route it all through certain SKUs in your store, make those SKUs supercharged so that they have all the power to sit at the top of the queue. Remember, it's all a game, right? It's all screen real estate. It's 50 square centimeters doing over $1 trillion for Tmall, right? So you've got to own it. The only way to do that now is to do it outside of Tmall. You got to leave the platform, figure out how to control that growth trajectory, because once the traffic comes in, and it comes in a strong wave, absolutely no competitor can stop you, because I just explained the algorithm itself is a growth-oriented, speed-driven, reputation-driven algorithm. Very different from Amazon's or Google's, which is about relevancy, or it doesn't index anyone that way. It's performance and speed.
It's super interesting, and that's very original presentation from a TP, an agency I've never heard about. Is first, the game starts before people enter Taobao, Tmall, and so on. And
definitely.
That's very, actually, that's eye-opening, because that's what we see. And to put words on what we see is very, very interesting, what you just did. The second aspect is your insistence on performance marketing, instead of saying that what a lot of other agencies say, you need to pay to get traffic, you need to have banners, you need to have to pay for keywords. So you have to, certainly, but the performance marketing you are talking about, understanding the algorithm, understanding the small details which make a big difference in terms of profitability of your store, it's so much more interesting, and giving a perspective which is way different from what we usually hear.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably because you haven't talked to the right TPs, right? So there's a few, I'm not going to mention them because they are competitors, but I have a lot of respect for them. There's a few pretty big operators that have been there from the beginning that use the same kinds of methods that we do. They have their own twist on it, but their stores are like ours. They perform on average better than the other stores in the category. So, and we can see it in their data. They each use different methods. Like one of them has mastered a different way of similar optimization. So instead of doing the rank pumping the way we do it, they do an insane amount of events. They just overwhelm any category they go into with event marketing. And by the way, that's like the most stressful kind of marketing, right? But boy, is it a competitive advantage. Real-time event marketing, which to my knowledge, only Alibaba has the tools to allow you to do anywhere in the world. It's super integrated. It's actually an advantage. Unfortunately, I don't have the team to do that. Like they have like 100 people just doing that. I mean, that's a brilliant competitive advantage, just as an example. So while we do have our own methods, there are other players in the space that we have deep respect for. My newest thing is I'm very, very focused on relationships around booking different layers of KOLs for live stream, which is my newest thing. We're also spending a lot of time on incubation, which essentially is, and I had to bring in an outside team and bring them in-house because my team didn't have the skill. It's a totally different world. It's like taking what a marketing agency or branding agency or activation agency will do for you over 5 years and doing it in 4 months. Like it's that intense in terms of content and activation. And the reason they do that is to create an organic trajectory for the brand and create that wave of influence, community, and content that just blows everyone out. It's the same as that operator I told you that does the events. And they seem to do it very well. I mean, they've activated, let's say, 2 brands in the last year from zero, never even heard of them, like ridiculous. All of them are doing millions a month. And the net result that you know you've done right is in month 4 to 6, one of those months, you've launched your Tmall store because the store, your brand in all the other platforms has qualified you to enter, which means you have traction, and you're able to book a top tier KOL like Via or Austin. And they've done it twice in a row. And we're now experimenting with 2 brands in our portfolio on it, 3 brands. And I think it's going to work. From what I can see, it's a pretty substantial competitive advantage. So you're going from the technical sort of operational expertise within the platform being important, but not necessary. There are so many ways to do it now. I think what I've seen is, the emergence of groups of people that are building their own communities that are very powerful to box everyone out. So instead of being like an individual store, like we run individual brand stores or a brand's commerce in multiple platforms, that can be a disadvantage, right? What if you're on the field of battle, like a medieval battle, and it's just you and someone else on your team, right? It's just 2 of you. And then on the other side of the field, there's like 15 of them. And then up in the hills, there's a flank with 20 more. I mean, you're dead, right? You're going to get crushed. And the original Daigous have realized this advantage. And their business model was disrupted by Tmall Global and cross-border legalization. So they've had to go into one of 2 things. They started buying brands and owning rights to China, which created most of the incubators. And then the other ones have become network marketers, and they are good at it. Cascade marketing. They have created digital downlines that is like a giant spider web. It's like an ant colony, right? Like our termite colony. There are 50,000 people in the line, all through WeChat. And so if they take your product into their sort of downline, you're going to move zillions of, they can activate a brand overnight, literally. It's unbelievable. So I think there's so much creativity and so much potential for everyone, even now, post-COVID, pre-COVID, it doesn't matter. China changes so fast. I don't think there's any bad time to enter. I think it's really all about whether your brand is ready. And that readiness is across the board. Resources, people, unfair advantage built in. You've got your IP under control. You've got, Tmall wants you as an example. So you've got something super desirable. You have the attributes they're looking for as a brand, as a product. You need all of these things combined to be successful. And I think it's very hard for people to do that because it's more than they have to do in any other market, much more. But it is what's necessary here to win, in my view, or in my experience.
What you just all said during this whole interview remind me of Peter Drucker saying entrepreneurship is neither an art, neither a science, it's a practice. I would say it's e-commerce on Tmall, e-commerce in China is not a science, it's not an art, it's a practice. By knowing that it's a default mode, the product is not appearing all the time, you have another mode by the practice. I would say the difference between what you say and other TP say is that they are not as transparent as you do. They are not as explanatory as you do. They don't explain so much details. And I believe that that's good for you because you build much more trust when you are sharp, precise, and detailed in your explanation. I'd like to move on the list of last questions of the interview. It's already 1 hour, and we could last another hour, I believe, but it would be too long for people listening to us. The last questions are short questions with short answers, very specific. It's about books and sources you use. What books have inspired you most? And as an EO member, I'm pretty sure you have plenty of them in mind.
Oh my God.
Books inspired you most for your entrepreneur journey. And we have the same question about China. If you have sources, it could be movies, books about China, about as an entrepreneur and about China.
Oh, that's interesting. I've been an EO for 14 years, so I've read too many books. And off the top of my head, I'm trying to think. Well, I think the 2 most useful, like practical for anyone going into business for themselves, and they want to be honest about what they're going to build. So if you're going to build a earth-shattering, global, world-shifting startup tech company, these are not for you, right? You need to read 0 to 1, right? That would be my recommendation, right? You read 0 to 1, and you follow people like the original team from PayPal, right? The PayPal Mafia. You read what they read. You follow Reid Hoffman. You follow those people, because I think if you're trying to create something that has exponential scale, like blitz scaled from 0 to 100, and you're going to get 100 million in funding and stuff, you need different mentors. So I think 0 to 1, I think The Hard Thing About Hard Things is an amazing book if you're going that route.
Book,
okay. Yeah. If you're going that route, Horowitz, and I think, just those two books are the best ones in my view. There's tons, but I got the most out of those. As a entrepreneur, so someone who has built many different businesses, some of them not so sexy, I think scaling up is the Bible of that, of getting from 0 to 1. And really that book is about getting from 1 to 10 and 10 to 100. It's really not about your startup phase. It's about when you get to 1 million in sales, which is about 4% of businesses in the world. How do you get to 10 million? Well, that's only 0.4, right? So only 10% of the 4% ever get there, right? It's like, it's a very small percentage, and scaling up is for that. It's about building growth and becoming a growth organization and doing it over a very long period of time and building a very sustainable and successful presence in the market for yourself. So I think scaling up is one. And I think getting training from someone like Jack Daly or his like, who know how to build high performance sales teams as an advantage, as a distinct competitive advantage in a scaling enterprise, is probably one of the best things you can do. I've had friends, including myself, I'm the same thing. When I was exposed to those two things, two of my businesses took off. Outside of that, so building like a very traditional business, I think you need those two things. You need to know how to recruit, manage, and build a high performance sales team, like a selling machine. And you also need to understand how to build a scaling up enterprise, like get from 1 to 10. Other than those two, I think if you make a product and you're dealing with retail or consumers, you're doing a direct to consumer business model, I think you need different mentors, honestly. So I would highly recommend you follow and read Seth Godin. I think, for example, his book, This Is Marketing, I just finished it, is some of the best experience sharing and advisory I've seen on developing real marketing skills and actually building something that lasts. I think he is exceptional in his perception. He's a good writer as well. I'm trying to think of some.
About China, would you have any book or movies or sources you like to share about China, to learn about China, to learn about business in China, or to stay up to date about China?
I think to understand where they came from, any Zhang Yimou movie is fantastic, right? So Raise the Red Lantern, To Live, unbelievably riveting about the Cultural Revolution. I think that's important. I think Beijing Bicycle is a great movie about the 80s and 90s in Beijing, what that life was like. In recent history, I'm trying to think if there's anyone that's been super influential on the China side, and I would say no. I haven't really read anything that I would recommend as a book, right? As something that I would trust. Part of the thing is when someone's writing a book on China, it expires in 2 weeks. So anything you said is probably going to be irrelevant in 3 weeks. So you got to give them some credit. It's harder. I think it's better to follow people who are actually actively doing things in China, not just watching China. So there's two kinds of intellectuals that follow China and write about China. There are watchers, right? And there are doers. I think the stuff coming from the latter is way more valuable for you as an entrepreneur. The stuff coming from the former is great if you go to university and you're a student, right? And you want to learn about cultural history or things that might change in the geopolitical infrastructure in the world and all that stuff. But the most interesting stuff as an entrepreneur is to follow and read people who are really actively doing it now in real time.
Where do you find what they publish? Where do you find sources?
I think one of the biggest, of course, is go back to relationships. you have to be invited into your industry or specific groups on WeChat. So I think one of the number one things I would say to anybody who's serious about China, move to Shanghai. Don't kid yourself. You can't really do it from afar. You're certainly not going to be treated with the same respect as someone who lives and works there and has friends and connections and is doing it. And therefore, you won't be invited into the private groups. And in the private groups, it's where all the really active people are in your space, and they share all the reports you want and the stuff that people pay for. And I mean, it's just unbelievable how much access to privileged information you get just by being in Shanghai and showing up. Woody Allen said it best, right? Half a success is just showing up. It really is, right? So be there for real.
I guess
like, you know that if you weren't in Beijing and Shanghai, you could never build Dashua Consulting into anything substantial. What if you were running that from, Brazil? Like, how are you going to do anything there? You just can't. I mean, you cannot be detached from the ecosystem. So I think live and work there, and it's very easy to find these people. There's almost no need to recommend. Like in my community around digital, I'm in like 16 chats, right? Not to mention the EO groups. I mean, it's just all over the place. But it took years, right? You build a reputation, you do stuff for people, and then they invite you into the private groups where you have access to the information. Another great thing is to just follow people on LinkedIn, honestly. Follow them, and also look up who has the best reputations, right? Like the different communication channels and publication channels that tend to get the best quality speakers or, intellectuals or participants and contributors. I think they're very obvious, right? You can easily see someone who's doing a flash and trash, hey, I'm just trying to get attention, or I'm a pitch man. You can sort them out in 3 seconds, versus someone who has genuine intent and is obviously someone respected by others in the space. I think, to me, it's very obvious. So I don't think it's very hard to find. I think you go into LinkedIn is the easiest place to find them. WeChat is, if you're on the inside, is the best place to find them. And joining a community like EO is an awesome place to find them, especially if you're looking for non-competing peers. And that's not the only organization you want to join, but it is one of the greats, right? It's a great network and it's great support. And outside of that, there are several podcast channels or, in my space, and people that are very active in publishing. And I think some of the stuff they put out is excellent. They're pretty good curators. And I think you just need good judgment, right? And it's the best way to stay current, honestly. It's the best way to stay current. So reading the past doesn't help you, to me. It just doesn't.
Last questions is about success and failure in China you have witnessed, which you did not expect. I'm asking this question because that's a way to see changing patterns, changing trends, is to see a success that we were not expecting and is happening, or a failure, something which failed, which was unexpected and it's still happening. I'll give you an example. Carrefour is leaving China, and Mobike Mobike and the bike sharing models have suffering. Surprising, some way, not expected, which shows a bigger pattern. Similarly, a success of mobile payment, which was a bit surprising for me because 10 years ago people were still paying on cash on delivery when delivered from e-commerce, and now people even pay their coffee to a shop with a QR code. So what would you say about success, something which happened in society or in business, or failure, which was very surprising to you over the last maybe 4 or 5 years?
Oh, that's a really good question. So it's funny you mentioned bike sharing failing. I thought that was absolutely going to be a long-term trend. So the fact that they're suffering is still shocking to me. I mean, I think the market was oversold and oversupplied, but I love it. I mean, when I'm in Shanghai, I ride, but I don't even take Didis unless I have to. It's pouring rain. I prefer it, walking and riding. So one of the surprises, if that's true that they are failing, I'm shocked. That's actually a shock to my system because that wasn't true 4 months ago. when I was last there. So you're surprising me with that.
I was more talking about the industry in itself, which has basically one-man player now. But yeah, true. Carrefour was more a better example of a failure which not have been foreseen like 5 or 6 years ago.
Yeah. So let's see. 5 years ago, what did we not have that's failed now after it's succeeded? I can't, off the top of my head, I have to tell you, I'm having a hard time. I see, and the reason is we analyze entry packages for people on a daily basis, right? I'm looking at whether I want to take something into China. And to me, it's like a light switch. Either your category is on or it's off. So I'll give you an example. Something that's completely surprised me is the sheer quantity of motorcycle racing people in China. Like people that are serious about motorbike racing and motorbike culture is shockingly large. So we run a brand. I didn't even think it was going to work. They charge like 10,000, 50,000, 25,000 for a piece of clothing, like a uniform or a helmet or whatever. 10,000. I mean, the average price is like 10 or 20. We sell full price retail. We've never discounted. We cannot have enough stock. It's been over a year. The sales are up 500% over last year, this quarter. The category just doubled in the last 60 days because of the new helmet law. I don't know what's going on. I've got 27,000, honestly, rich dudes who own like Ducatis, right? Who like race Ducatis in a private WeChat group that are our customers. And all we have to do is drop a message that a new item is coming in and it sells out before it hits the store. So if you're looking at a shock, I'm blown away that there is actually a tribe of people riding motorcycles in a place that's all electric scooter that is big enough to support, and I'm going to tell you this, it's a multi-100 million RMB business offline, and it's going to be, it's big online too. But I'm in a state of shock, and I'm seeing this sort of like I always underestimate how big the fan base is in China for a particular thing. So as an example, there's a brand we want to take because globally they're number one in horseback riding equipment and supplies, okay? And I've been trying to convince them to do China because they will be the market leader. There is no local substitute for them. And they have an awesome chance, but convincing them, they're based in America, they bought the UK brand, brought it to the States, they're a big company. You don't even think about this category, but man, the size of the community of people with money that have either bought horses or taught their kids how to ride horses in China is way bigger than you think. And I'm like, really? Like, really? But it's China. I think like when something becomes a cultural phenomenon there, the size and scale is huge. So there's two examples of surprisingly large subcategories that you don't think about. These are not millennials. Jack Ma buys my client's equipment and has one of these motorcycles, to give you an idea. Like, you don't even think about it, right? So that's one surprise. And then one failure, I'm trying to think of something that's gone out of fashion. I hate to say this, but I think WeChat as a social platform, not as a communication tool, has surprisingly failed. I'll tell you, a shock to me is that WeChat did not become commerce because they were the most set up to do it. So I'm actually, if you want to look at the biggest shock to me, is that WeChat itself has not taken over more of social commerce. It's actually a very small percentage, and I'm surprised. So I'm shocked that they've lost ground to Douyin and other platforms, and even Alibaba's live stream. I'm actually shocked because I live on WeChat. I mean, I live on it. My team lives on it.
What are you more shocked by? Because, for instance, the search on WeChat is not very powerful. The fact that you cannot really going viral on WeChat is very hard because when you you don't share at the same time like Facebook is doing, for instance. The algorithm to target people on WeChat doing advertisement, tell me if I'm wrong, but I feel it's not very powerful, not very elaborate. What aspects make you more surprised?
I think with WeChat, my biggest surprise is that they control the community traffic. So it's pretty much all discussions about, hey, what do you recommend? Oh, I'm gonna shop for this cup. What kind of cup should I get? Oh, I was in this store last weekend. It's super hot. Have you gone? It's this new Scandinavian store on Jiangsu. Check it out, right? All of that word of mouth is literally happening. Even promotions for Taobao and Tmall, like we manage a private group of consumers for an entire tribe in one of my customer service managers' private WeChat. He manages that group of 30,000 people, right? I don't understand why the commerce doesn't just move there, because it makes no sense. But it doesn't. People literally will still go to Taobao, search for the brand of the product, shop the price, buy from there. Instead of why not just buy directly from us? You're sitting in our community chat. It is so much easier to not move platforms.
Sure.
And yet they are willing to multitask. They'll discover it and get recommended or communicate about it in WeChat, and yet they'll still transact in the other places. That you were coming from, your question was about, as a merchant, the tools. I don't really care about the tools because the tools are irrelevant. If I'm a person and I have a community of 30,000, I can take payment directly into my personal account, right? There's no restriction. Why is the commerce still happening somewhere else? It should just happen right there, right? You have 500 people in your chat group, you send an offer, they buy, but they actually don't. They still go to the other channels. That is very surprising failure to me of the social tools. Yeah.
Very, very interesting aspect. The first time someone mentioned WeChat as a failure on something, and WeChat is always presented as a success on everything. Thank you so much for your time. It's already 1 hour and a half. I think that's a record longer podcast I've ever recorded so far. So thank you very much for your time. It was very instructive. I learned a lot, very specific and new perspectives on e-commerce. I'm sure people listening also learned new perspectives. In a way, you talk about it. It's bringing really a new understanding of e-commerce in China. Thanks so much for taking the time from Hong Kong.
You're welcome. Thank you, Matteo. It was a pleasure meeting you. I'm sure I'll see you soon.
Yes, for sure. Thanks everyone for listening.
Take care. Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.